You are entering a calm and peaceful space to help you melt away all the busy thoughts of the day and fall asleep easily and naturally by listening to the mystical, magical story of the day, presented in a sleep-inducing hypnotic voice that will put you into total relaxation. The object of our 2-hour long-form videos is to quickly put you into a state of feeling the narration you are hearing while you close your eyes and relax. Your goal in order to fall asleep quickly should be to close your eyes at the beginning and just let go to feel the words rather than to process them. Think of it more as being a way to get bored to sleep and just let the tingles tingle. So get into your most comfortable position under a blanket with your head on a pillow now, and close your eyes while you relax and listen to the narration. Whenever you feel like it, just let go of all thoughts and float off into a deep sleep. Don't worry. You always remain in full control as you listen to these stories and can bring yourself out of this relaxed state whenever you wish. You can also listen to or watch them anytime you are wide awake. However, we suggest you do not do so while driving or operating heavy machinery, so there will be no chance of you falling asleep. The average story length is approximately 2 hours, which allows those of us who need a bathroom break to take one and come back to continue listening where we left off. If you would like to listen for longer than 2 hours, you can set the video to replay automatically on any device you're using. Google can help you find the settings you will need. Listening on the TV with the sound lowered just enough to hear the breathy voice lulling me to sleep is my favorite method. After you awake refreshed and found that this video was helpful, please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified when our next story posts. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section, and we'll try to answer any questions you have. Now get as comfy as you can as tonight's story begins. Close your eyes now and let yourself begin to sink slowly, gently, into a state of deep, floating calm. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to plan, nothing to worry about. The day is done, and all its small demands have already dissolved into the quiet air around you. Feel your body growing heavier with each slow breath you take, your shoulders releasing, your jaw softening, your hands resting open and still. You are safe here. You are held. And tonight, we are going somewhere ancient, somewhere that exists at the very beginning of a story. The long, long story of who we are. Breathe in slowly. And as you breathe out, feel yourself drifting downward through time, through centuries, through millennia, through ages so distant that the very landscape of the earth looked different. The stars were arranged slightly differently overhead. The seasons came and went with a rhythm older than memory. The world was quieter then and wilder, and yet in one particular place something was stirring. Something was being built, something that would wait, patient as stone, for more than 11,000 years, just for us to find it. We are going to Göbekli Tepe. Say the name softly to yourself if you like. Göbekli Tepe. It rolls from the lips like something half-remembered, like the echo of a dream you once had and couldn't quite hold. In Turkish, it means potbelly hill, or sometimes it is translated as belly button hill or navel hill, the hill at the center of things. And this name, as you will discover, feels more meaningful the longer you sit with it. For this hill in the sun-warmed highlands of what is now southeastern Turkey did indeed sit at the center of something, at the center of the birth of human civilization as we know it, at the center of our oldest impulse toward the sacred, at the center of a mystery so profound that every answer it offers seems to open 3 new questions. But we will not hurry. We never hurry here. Let your breathing slow even further now. In and out. In and out. Feel the weight of your body pressing gently into the softness beneath you. Your legs are relaxed. Your arms are relaxed. Your chest rises and falls in its own unhurried rhythm, and with every exhale you feel yourself drifting just a little further from the ordinary world, from the noise, from the clocks, from everything that measures and rushes and demands. You are moving now into the open, timeless space of deep listening, and in that space, a story waits, an ancient story, the oldest story of all. Let us begin not at the site itself, but in the landscape that held it. Because place matters, because the earth itself is part of the telling. Picture, if you will, a land that is both ancient and alive. The highlands of what the ancients would later call Mesopotamia, the land between 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, rivers that even today carry the weight of all that happened along their banks across 10,000 years of human civilization. But we are going further back than any of that, further back than Babylon, further back than Sumer, further back than writing or pottery or the taming of seeds. We are at the beginning. The year is approximately 9,600 years before the birth of Christ. The last great ice age has ended relatively recently, as the earth measures time. Just a few thousand years before, the glaciers retreated, the permafrost softened, and the world began to breathe again in green. The climate in this part of the world is wetter than it will ever be again. The air smells of rain and wild grass and the distant sweetness of almond blossom. The land rolls in long, gentle slopes, broken by limestone ridges that catch the morning light and hold it. Let yourself imagine standing on a high ridge and looking out across this ancient world. Breathe in the air, which is cool with the memory of a night that has just passed. The sky overhead is vast and pale gold, where the sun is rising, and everywhere below you the land moves. Herds of wild gazelle ripple like a living river across the golden grass. Wild sheep pick their careful way along the lower slopes. Wild boar root in the shadow of the pistachio trees, and here and there the flash of a red fox cuts between the rocks. Wild einkorn wheat, the ancestor of all the bread that humanity will ever bake, nods its slim heads in the morning breeze. There are wild barley, wild lentils, wild chickpeas. If you were here now, If you were one of the people who lived on this land 11,000 years ago, you would see that this landscape is more than wild. It is generous. It is full. It is, as one archaeologist who would come here thousands of years later would describe it, a paradise. And in this paradise, on a particular hill, something was beginning. Let your body soften further now, your eyelids growing beautifully, pleasantly heavy. Feel yourself settling into this. Feel the warmth of deep relaxation spreading from the crown of your head all the way down through your shoulders, your chest, your belly, into your legs, and all the way to the soles of your feet. You are drifting. You are dreaming. And the story continues. The people who would build what we now call Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. We must pause and hold that knowledge gently, because it is the very heart of what makes this story so extraordinary. These were people who had not yet settled. They had no permanent homes, at least, not in the sense we mean. They followed the seasons. They followed the animals. They knew the land with an intimacy that is almost impossible to imagine in our mapped and measured world. They knew which stands of wild wheat would be ready in which valley in which month. They knew the migration paths of the gazelle. They read the sky for signs of rain and cold. They read the land the way we might read a book. Every track, every scent, every changing color in the grass, a sentence in an ongoing conversation with the living world. These were deeply intelligent people, people with rich inner lives, people who felt wonder and grief and reverence and curiosity, people who looked up at the stars and asked the same questions that have never stopped being asked. Who are we? Where did we come from? What happens when we die? What is the great pattern that moves beneath the surface of things? And at Göbekli Tepe, we have proof that they answered those questions with stone. The hill itself sits at about 1,000 feet above the surrounding plain, in the Germush Mountains. It is very near what is now the city of Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey. This ancient city has always been surrounded by stories. It carries the weight of deep time. The region around it was once called Edessa, and it was known across many different religious traditions as the city of the prophets. This is, by some accounts, the region where the biblical patriarch Abraham was born. It is land that has always been considered holy by those who lived near it. And just beyond the city's edge, rising gently against the sky, the hill waited, Göbekli Tepe, patient, silent, full. For most of the centuries that followed its last use, around 8,000 years before Christ, the hill simply sat there. Over time, slowly, generation by generation, earth and wind-blown dust covered what had been built into it. Grass grew. Farmers occasionally plowed its upper surfaces. Nobody knew, really, what lay beneath. Local Kurdish people knew the hill by another name, Gire Mirazan, which means Wish Hill. They considered it a sacred place. Something in the ground itself, something in the long silence of the stone, seemed to radiate a quality that was felt even without understanding. People tied pieces of fabric to a mulberry tree that grew there. offerings of wishes, prayers carried on threads of cloth in the wind. The earth was keeping its secret, but the feeling of that secret seeped upward through the soil like water through limestone. In 1963, a survey team from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University came through this region and noted the hill. They saw some fragments of flint tools and some limestone slabs protruding from the earth. They concluded, reasonably enough for their time, that these were likely the remnants of a medieval Byzantine cemetery. They noted it, filed it, and moved on. The world was not yet ready to understand what was here. Let your breathing deepen again now. In, slowly, and out, slowly. Feel the quiet settling in like soft snow, covering everything in a blanket of peace. There is nothing to resist, nothing to hold. You are floating gently in the current of this story, and it carries you without effort. 30 years passed. The hill kept its silence. Then, in October of 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt came to Turkey's southeastern highlands. He had been working at a nearby site called Nevalu Çori, a pre-pottery Neolithic settlement that had already begun to reveal hints of something extraordinary in this part of the world. Nevalu Çori had its own T-shaped limestone pillars, its own carved reliefs, its own suggestions of a ritual life far older and more complex than anyone had expected. Schmidt was looking for more. He was following a thread. He asked in the villages around the area about hills where flint could be found, and a man named Mahmut Yıldız, whose family owned the land on which Göbekli Tepe sat, guided him to the hill. The Yıldız family had been finding carved limestone fragments while plowing for years, and had dutifully reported them to the local museum. Schmidt walked up the slope. He saw the limestone slabs. He saw the flint tools lying so thickly across the surface that, in his own words, there were more flints in 1 square meter than many archaeologists find in entire sites. He knelt down. He looked at the shapes of the stones. And he understood, in the way that certain moments of recognition arrived like a current of electricity through the chest, that this was not a medieval cemetery. This was something else entirely, something he had never seen before. He returned the following year with a team and began to excavate. And what rose up from the earth as the soil was carefully brushed and scraped away would rewrite the entire history of human civilization. Let yourself rest deeper now. Your mind is quiet. Your body is still. You are listening with that deep, unhurried part of you that receives stories like rain receives the earth, effortlessly, completely. Drift with me now into the stones themselves. What Klaus Schmidt and his team uncovered at Göbekli Tepe was a series of large circular enclosures, rooms in a sense. Although rooms unlike any that had ever been seen from this period of human history, each enclosure was formed by a low stone wall, and within that wall, set into the earth at intervals, stood massive T-shaped limestone pillars. Massive. The word must be understood in its full weight. These pillars stood up to 5.5 meters tall. which is nearly 18 feet. They weighed the largest of them as much as 50 tons. 50 tons of limestone, carved and shaped and raised into position by people who had no metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals, and no precedent for doing such a thing. At the center of each enclosure, 2 pillars stood taller than the rest. These central pillars always faced each other in a kind of silent, enduring conversation. And the forms of these pillars. This is the detail that makes the throat tighten with something like recognition. The top of each pillar is wider than the shaft, forming the horizontal bar of a T-shape. But looking at these central pillars closely, you begin to see something. There are arms carved in low relief along the sides of the shaft. There are hands resting on a belly. There are belts carved in stone. These pillars are not simply abstract shapes. They are people. They are tall, still, silent figures, beings of stone, arms at their sides, hands resting, heads implied by that wide horizontal crossbar. They are someone's ancestors. They are someone's gods. They stand in their circles as they have stood for more than 11,000 years, and they wait, and they do not speak, and yet they say everything. Around these central figures, the walls of each enclosure were studded with more pillars. 12 to 14 of them forming the ring, all facing inward, all facing the 2 at the center. And carved into the surfaces of these pillars was a world. Let your eyes grow heavier now, beautifully heavy, pleasantly heavy, your breath flowing in and out like a tide that asks nothing of you. You don't need to hold on to anything. Let each thought drift away like a leaf on still water. You are very relaxed. You are very comfortable. And the story comes to you now in images, soft and vivid, like a dream that knows your name, the carvings. We must speak of the carvings. In a world that had no writing, no alphabet, no language captured in marks on clay or papyrus, the people of Göbekli Tepe spoke in animals. Every surface of every pillar seems to breathe with the living world. Foxes stretch their lithe bodies around pillars, their eyes bright with something sly and knowing. Wild boar crouch low, their tusks implied in the limestone. Serpents wind in sinuous lines from the base of columns to the top, as if the pillars themselves have grown from the underworld. Vultures spread their magnificent wings in bas relief, their bald heads tilted to some feast or some sky burial invisible to us. Scorpions curl their armored tails. Gazelle pause in eternal mid-step. Lions open their stone mouths. Wild sheep, cranes, ducks, ibex, the entire living community of this ancient landscape is represented here, not as a simple record, but as a conversation, as a cosmology, as a prayer. What is striking, and what the archaeologists have noticed with great care, is what is not carved on these pillars. There are no images of hunting raids. There are no wounded animals lying fallen. There are no scenes of capture or domination. These carvings focus with particular attention on the creatures that were perhaps most powerful in the imagination, the predators, the mysterious ones, the ones that moved at night or spiraled in the sky, or carried both venom and wonder. It is as if the people who made these images were not recording what they ate, but honoring what they feared, revered, and sought to understand. And among all the enclosures that have been uncovered, there is one that has drawn more attention than any other. It is known simply as Enclosure D, and within Enclosure D there is a pillar, a single pillar, that may be the most extraordinary carved stone in the entire history of our species. We call it the vulture stone. It is pillar 43 in Enclosure D. And when you look at it, even in photographs, even in descriptions like this one, you feel the particular quality of a message. Not a message you can immediately decode, but one that you know was intended. One that carries weight and meaning and the long labor of carving arms. On the broad western face of this pillar, a world unfolds. A large vulture, wings spread wide, fills much of the upper face. Its wings are open in the unmistakable posture of a bird in flight, or perhaps a bird landing on something sacred. Above one of its spread wings, a disk or sphere, something round, something potent, rests as if the vulture is balancing it or carrying it or honoring it. Scholars have debated this disk for decades. Is it the sun? Is it the moon? Is it a disembodied human head, as Klaus Schmidt suggested, the symbolic soul of a person, ascending in the body of a great bird? Or is it, as some astronomical researchers have proposed, a representation of a star, the northern celestial pole? That hole in the sky that, in many shamanic traditions, was understood as the passageway between this world and the next. Beneath the vulture, a scorpion is carved. And below the scorpion, resting at the very base of the pillar in a pose that is shocking for its specificity, is the figure of a headless human man. His decapitation is not incidental. It is the whole point of the image. The head is somewhere else. The head has gone somewhere. This is a story about departure, about the soul's journey, about what happens when the visible part of us is set aside and the deeper part moves on. Let that image rest softly in your mind. The vulture, the disk, the scorpion, the headless man, a story told in stone, a story told once, 11,000 years ago, and never explained. And yet it is strangely familiar, because in cultures across the ancient world, the vulture was understood as a psychopomp, a soul carrier. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Nekhbet wore the vulture on her crown and presided over death and rebirth. In the Zoroastrian tradition of ancient Persia, the dead were laid on stone towers, open to the sky so that vultures would come and carry the flesh of the departed upward into the heavens. In the Tibetan practice of sky burial, still carried out today, the body of a deceased person is offered to vultures, understood as the dakinis, the sky-dancing spiritual beings who receive the soul and guide it onward. Even in ancient Turkey, at Catalhoyuk, a later Neolithic settlement, there are murals on the walls showing headless figures surrounded by vultures. This was not an isolated idea. This was an ancient, widespread, deeply human understanding of the relationship between death, the sky, and the great soaring birds that moved between the earth and the heavens. And at Göbekli Tepe, carved into stone at the very dawn of recorded symbolic expression, this understanding already existed, already mature, already complex, already full of meaning. Your breathing is slow and steady now, in and out. The room around you is quiet. Your body has grown wonderfully heavy and still. You are drifting now between waking and sleeping, and that is exactly where you should be. Right at the edge of the dream. Let the story carry you there. Let us talk about the T-shaped pillars themselves, about what they mean, because this is where the mystery deepens in a way that makes something quiet and serious stir in the chest. Klaus Schmidt, who spent the last 2 decades of his life at this site and thought about little else, came to believe that the T-shaped pillars represent human figures, that the wide horizontal top is a stylized head, viewed from above, that the shaft is the body, that the arms carved in relief along some of the pillars confirm this reading. In his view, these great stone beings are people, they are ancestors. Or perhaps they are something more than ancestors. Perhaps they are the beings that people in this early age sensed were present, watching, inhabiting the world of dream and vision and the space between sleeping and waking. Perhaps they are the first gods. Schmidt came to believe that the people who built Göbekli Tepe were practicing something shamanic. In shamanic traditions from Siberia to South America, the cosmos was understood as having layers, an upper world, a middle world, and a lower world. These spheres were often connected by a central axis, which might be represented by a pillar, a tree, or a mountain. The soul could travel along this axis, guided by a shaman who knew the spiritual territories and the beings that inhabited them. The shaman's journey required a kind of symbolic death, a loosening of the ordinary self, in order to achieve the expanded state of consciousness in which the spiritual world became visible. Now look again at Pillar 43, the headless man, the great soaring bird, the celestial sphere above the vulture's wing, the journey, the flight, the arrival. We cannot be certain. We can never be certain. We have no written records, no spoken testimony, no codex or scripture from these people. We have only what the stone holds, and what the stone holds is extraordinary. Let your mind grow softer now. There is no need to hold the details tightly. Let them float around you like warm water. You are resting. You are very nearly asleep. And the story continues in that gentle, lilting way that dreams have, coming to you in feeling and image rather than in precise fact. That is how this story was always meant to be received. Not analyzed, not measured, felt. Let us drift now toward the question of the builders themselves. Who were these people? How did they do what they did? The answer that archaeology has given us is both humbling and thrilling. They were hunter-gatherers, people who walked the land. They had not yet, as far as we can tell from the earliest layers of the site, learned to cultivate their food in the systematic way that we call farming. They hunted gazelle, which they appear to have pursued in great organized drives at certain times of year. They supplemented their diet with the wild plants of the landscape, the einkorn wheat, the barley, the lentils and almonds and pistachios that grew in abundance around the hill. The great quantities of grinding stones found at the site, more than 7,000 of them, tell us that cereal processing was a significant activity here. And those enormous stone vessels, large enough to hold 43 gallons of liquid, tell us that feasting happened here, perhaps drinking, perhaps a fermented grain drink that would not be entirely unlike what we would later call beer. The feast was part of the ritual. The ritual was part of the building. The building was the whole point. Because here is the extraordinary reversal that Göbekli Tepe presents to everything we thought we knew. We had believed, for most of the history of archaeology, that the sequence of civilization ran in a specific, logical order. First, people learned to farm. Then, having a stable food supply, they settled in villages. Then, having leisure time and social structure, they built temples and monuments. Then eventually they developed religion and art and writing and all the things we associate with civilization. First came the material, then came the sacred. But Göbekli Tepe tells a completely different story. Here, at the very beginning, before farming, before cities, before pottery, before any of the things we associate with settled life, people built a temple. They organized themselves. They coordinated the quarrying and transport and raising of multi-ton limestone pillars. They carved them with extraordinary skill and deliberate meaning. They gathered here from an area that may have extended 100 miles in every direction. And all of this happened before the first domesticated grain seed was planted in this soil. The sacred came first. Klaus Schmidt spent years considering the implications of this, and he eventually arrived at a statement that has since become one of the most quoted sentences in all of archaeological thought. He said, "First came the temple, then the city." What he meant was this: the driving force of human civilization, the force that moved people to organize, to cooperate, to develop new technologies, to feed large groups, to plan across seasons and years, may not have been the practical need for food. It may have been the spiritual need for meaning, the hunger that runs deeper than the hunger of the stomach, the hunger to understand, the hunger to mark the sacred, the hunger to stand together in the presence of something vast and unnameable, and to say, "We are here, and we recognize you, and we are not alone." Breathe in that thought now, slowly. Feel it settle into you. Feel the quiet wonder of it. You are very relaxed. Your arms are heavy and warm. Your legs are still. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to do. You are simply here, floating in the soft warmth of this ancient story, and it holds you gently. There is another layer to the mystery of who built Göbekli Tepe, and that layer concerns the question of skill. Not just organizational skill, but artistic and mathematical skill. Research published in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal revealed something astonishing about how the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were laid out. Using computer modeling, researchers discovered that the placement of the three main excavated enclosures was governed by geometry, specifically by the geometry of the equilateral triangle. The builders stretched a rope, or used some equivalent means of measuring, to establish the positions of three central T-pillars in three different enclosures, and those 3 points form an equilateral triangle of extraordinary precision. These were not 3 circles built at random, each complete in itself and separate from the others. They were conceived as a single complex, a unified design, a plan. This tells us something profound. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not improvising. They had a conception of the whole before they laid a single stone. They could hold the shape of something vast and complex in their minds and then execute that vision over years or decades, or perhaps longer. The mathematical understanding embedded in this site, the geometry, the alignment, the proportion, speaks of minds that were fully, completely, breathtakingly modern. And this is the detail that changes how we look at all of human prehistory. Because if the people at Göbekli Tepe more than 11,000 years ago had this capacity for abstract mathematical thinking, for long-term planning, for collaborative artistic vision, then when did humans first become like this? The answer, increasingly, is they always were. For as long as our species has existed in its current form, we have had brains of this capacity. We have had the same ability to dream and wonder and plan and create. What changed over time was not our minds. What changed was our circumstances, our tools, our accumulated knowledge. But the essential human interior, the dreaming, seeking, questioning soul, was always there. And Göbekli Tepe is its oldest monument. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. Your eyelids are beautifully heavy. Your breathing has slowed to a long, peaceful rhythm. In and out, in and out. The world outside this moment has grown very distant and very soft, like the memory of a sound. We need to speak now of what is perhaps the strangest and most beautiful mystery that Göbekli Tepe holds. The mystery of its burial. After approximately 1,500 years of use, after generations of people had come to this hill to build and carve and gather and feast and pray and bury their dead, Göbekli Tepe was sealed. The great enclosures were filled in, not by neglect, not by the slow accumulation of wind-blown dust over an abandoned place. The enclosures were deliberately, carefully, intentionally filled in with limestone rubble, flint tools, animal bones, and soil. The pillars were covered, the carvings were hidden, the rings were buried. For a long time, archaeologists assumed this was a single, deliberate act, a ceremonial entombment, perhaps, a way of retiring a sacred space that had run its course. And this interpretation has a deep resonance with something that exists across many human cultures. The idea that sacred places, like sacred objects, have a life cycle. They come into being. They serve their purpose. And then they are formally, ritually closed, not destroyed, not neglected, honored in their ending. In some Christian traditions, an altar that is being retired must be formally desanctified. Among the Olmec civilization of ancient Mesoamerica, sacred carved stone heads were sometimes deliberately defaced and buried when their time had passed. The power within them neutralized through a ritual act, so that it would not remain dangerous or accessible to those who had not been properly prepared. The burial of Göbekli Tepe fits beautifully and eerily within this global pattern of sacred retirement. More recent research has complicated the picture slightly. Some of the filling may have been the result of landslides. Earthquakes may have damaged the structures over centuries of use, and the accumulation of rubble in the lower enclosures may have included both deliberate deposits and natural collapse. The truth, as always, with a site this ancient, is layered. Both things are probably true, but here is the grace note of this particular mystery. The act of burial, whatever its precise nature and motivation, preserved the site. While the hilltop above was plowed by farmers over thousands of years, the great enclosures below slept undisturbed, wrapped in their limestone blanket, protected by the very earth that covered them. The burial was the salvation. The hiding was the gift to the future. And so after 11,000 years of sleep, the hill opened its eyes again when Klaus Schmidt brushed away the first handful of soil in 1994 and saw the stone beneath. Feel your own eyes growing heavy now. You are drifting, drifting. The room is warm, the air is still. You are very comfortable, very safe. You are held just as those stones were held in the earth, patient and waiting, perfect in the darkness. Let us rest here a moment in this suspended place and breathe. In slowly and out, slowly in and out. Let the images of the site settle into you like stones settling to the bottom of a clear, still pool. The wide limestone plain, the hill rising against the blue-white sky, the excavated trenches with their corrugated metal roofs protecting what lies beneath. And under those roofs, in the careful, unhurried light of scholarship, the great pillars standing in their circles, patient, enduring, not going anywhere. Approximately 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated as of the early 2000s. 10%. The site sprawls beneath the hill in a way that geomagnetic surveys have begun to map, revealing approximately 20 enclosures waiting in the earth. Many of them perhaps larger than those already uncovered. There may be structures at the center of the main mound that have not yet been reached, whose age would push the story even further back. One estimate suggests that a complete excavation of the site at the careful pace that good archaeology demands could take 150 years. The hill is, in this sense, still largely asleep, still keeping most of its secrets, still waiting, patient as it has always been patient, for the next layer of understanding. And it is not alone. in the years since Klaus Schmidt first brushed soil from those T-shaped stones, the region around Göbekli Tepe has revealed itself to be extraordinarily rich in related sites. The entire area of the Taş Tepeler, which means stone hills in Turkish, is dotted with sites from roughly the same period, each with its own circle of pillars, its own carvings, its own particular personality. At Karahan Tepe, about 30 kilometers away, excavations begun in 2019 have already revealed enclosures of stunning complexity. At one remarkable structure, a single carved human face, the oldest three-dimensional portrait of a human being ever found, emerged from the stone like a person surfacing from deep water, its eyes open and startling. At Seeberg, another related site, a carved scene on a wall shows a human figure holding what appears to be a bull's horns and a leaping leopard. A moment of confrontation, of relationship between the human and the animal world, captured in stone with a vivid, energetic realism that seems almost impossible for its age. These are not isolated monuments. They're part of a network, a web of sacred sites spread across this highland landscape, connected perhaps by paths worn smooth by the feet of pilgrims walking from one hill to another, from one circle of standing stones to the next, following the great invisible geography of the sacred as it was understood by the people of this age. Klaus Schmidt called it a cathedral on a hill. He believed that people traveled up to 100 miles to reach Göbekli Tepe, coming from across a wide region, perhaps seasonally, perhaps for great feasts and ceremonies. This gathering would have had profound social consequences. Different groups, speaking perhaps different dialects, with different clan identities, would have been brought into contact at this neutral, sacred ground. Ideas would have been exchanged, alliances formed, stories blended into shared mythology. The shaman of one group would have encountered the shaman of another, and the great invisible map of spiritual knowledge would have been expanded, confirmed, or revised. In a world without writing, the monument was the memory. The carved pillar was the text. The gathering at the sacred hill was the library. Your breathing is very slow and very deep now, in and out. Your body has grown almost imperceptibly heavy, sinking gently into rest. Your thoughts have loosened their grip on you and are drifting now, like clouds across a still evening sky, moving without urgency, carrying no weight. You don't need to hold anything. You don't need to remember anything. The story is holding itself, and you are simply listening, floating, at peace. There is a question that hovers over Göbekli Tepe like a particular quality of light. Warm, slightly hazy, impossible to look at directly, but impossible to ignore. And that question is this: how did these people feel, standing in their enclosure of stone, surrounded by those great carved figures in the flicker of firelight or the cold white wash of stars? We cannot know with certainty. We can never reach back across 11,000 years and inhabit another person's inner life. But we can look at the evidence with compassion and imagination, and we can make a careful guess. They felt what we feel. The same human nervous system that fills your chest with awe when you stand in a great cathedral, or at the edge of the ocean, or beneath a sky dense with stars on a clear mountain night. That same system was vibrating in the chests of the people who stood in the circles at Göbekli Tepe. The architecture was built to produce exactly that response. The massive scale of the pillars, their anthropomorphic quality, their enclosing ring. All of these elements combine to produce a psychological effect that researchers describe as awe. The sensation of being in the presence of something vast and powerful and other. Awe, as scientists have more recently discovered, is one of the most distinctive and arguably most important of human emotional responses. It is associated with a sense of time slowing down, the ego becoming smaller, and a feeling of connection to something larger than oneself. It is the emotion most closely associated with spiritual and religious experience across all cultures and all of recorded history. The people who built Göbekli Tepe understood awe. They understood how to create it. They built the architecture of awe in stone, and they stood in it together. And what happened in those moments, those gatherings in the firelit circles, those feasts, those ceremonies, may have been the very thing that first made it possible for large groups of unrelated humans to work together, to trust one another, to share labor, to plan across time, to become, in the deepest sense of the word, a people. Let the weight of that settle into you now, like the settling of deep waters after a disturbance on the surface. Feel your shoulders soften. Feel your jaw release. Feel the long muscles of your back and legs releasing their last remnants of the day's tension. You are doing so well. You are very relaxed, very comfortable, very near the edge of sleep. Before we reach the end of this first passage of our story, let us pause and breathe in the landscape one more time. It is night at Göbekli Tepe, not our night, but the night of 11,000 years ago. The Milky Way blazes overhead in its full, unobscured glory. No city lights, no pollution, just the pure, magnificent sprawl of 100 billion suns reflected in the open eyes of a person standing on a hill. The temperature has dropped since sunset. The air smells of pistachio wood smoke, of roasted meat, of the cool mineral breath of limestone. Inside the enclosures, torches or oil lamps cast their moving light across the carved surfaces of the pillars. And in that moving light, the foxes seem to run, the serpents seem to writhe, the vultures seem to shift their wings in slow, thoughtful consideration. The two great central figures stand at the heart of each circle, taller than any man, their arms resting at their sides, their wide stone heads lifted slightly, as if attending to something just above the human range of hearing. And the people are gathered. Imagine them, dressed perhaps in furs or woven grasses, their faces painted with ochre, their hair bound with sinew, their eyes reflecting the flame. They have come from many different places. They have walked days to be here. And here, in this circle, in this intentional space, under this particular sky, with these particular stone presences watching, they perform what they have always performed. Whatever it was, we cannot know its name. We cannot know its words, if it had words. We cannot know its gestures, its songs, its silences, but we can know that it was real, that it mattered, that it was worth everything they gave to make it possible. And we can know that something of what they felt, some echo of the awe, some resonance of the ceremony, some shimmer of the sacred, has survived, has been preserved in the limestone of the pillars, sleeping alongside the carvings, waiting in the soil that held them through 11,000 years of world, waiting for us to come, waiting for us to listen, and you are listening now. Rest here a while. Let the story continue to move through you like slow water through stone, finding its way into every quiet place. We will go deeper still, into the carvings and their possible cosmic meanings, into the ancient landscape and its connection to the very origins of farming and civilization, into the spiritual traditions that may share a root with this most ancient of sacred spaces, and into the ongoing discoveries that are still emerging from the earth around this extraordinary hill. But for now, breathe, settle, sink. Your eyelids are heavy. Your body is still. The night is warm and deep, and somewhere, very far away in time, but very close in the language of the human spirit, a circle of stone stands on a hill, and the stars turn slowly overhead, and something old and vast and patient watches and waits and whispers the oldest word of all. Here, we were here, and so are you. Sleep if you are ready. The story will be waiting when you come back, soft as morning, quiet as stones in the long light. Welcome back. Or perhaps you never left. Perhaps you drifted for a little while in that soft, borderless space between waking and sleeping. And now you have floated gently back to the surface, just enough to hear the voice again. Just enough to let the story find you where you rest. You are still held, still warm, still safe. Feel that now. The weight of your body settled and still. Feel the long muscles of your back and legs releasing. Feel your hands resting open, your fingers loose, your jaw soft. With every breath you take, you go a little deeper. Not into darkness, but into warmth. Into a golden, quiet place that exists just below the ordinary surface of the mind, where stories are received like light through water, diffused and beautiful, and all around you at once. We are still at Göbekli Tepe. We never quite left. The hill is still there on its ridge above the Harran plain. The stars are still turning overhead in their ancient processional. The carved pillars are still standing in their circles, arms at their sides, wide stone heads lifted. And there is more to tell. There is so much more to tell. So settle back now, drift a little deeper, and let the next layer of this extraordinary story come to you. We left, at the end of our first passage, with the image of the night sky over Göbekli Tepe. And it is the sky that we must return to now. Because the sky was not merely the backdrop to this ancient place. It may have been, in a very real and literal sense, the text that the builders were reading, the book from which they were working, the living, turning, endlessly meaningful library that they consulted in the construction of their sacred spaces and the carving of their sacred pillars. Let us speak of the stars. Human beings have been watching the sky for as long as we have existed. This is not speculation. Cave paintings and bone artifacts from Europe, dating back 30, 40, even 50,000 years, show patterns that some researchers believe are records of celestial observations. The Pleiades, the moon, the movement of particular stars across the turning year. The sky was the first calendar. The sky was the first clock. The sky was, for our ancestors, the face of a world larger than the one beneath their feet. A world that moved with absolute regularity, that could be trusted absolutely, that kept its promises year after year. At Göbekli Tepe, the sky was not merely observed. It was built into the stone. Several of the enclosures appear to have been deliberately oriented towards specific points on the horizon, where particular stars or constellations rose or set at significant times of year. The two central pillars in each enclosure, standing taller than the rest, often face each other along an axis that researchers have found to align with specific celestial events. In enclosure D, the axis of the two great central pillars points toward the setting of Deneb, the brightest star in the constellation Cygnus, the swan. A star that in the epoch of Göbekli Tepe's construction would have been very near the northern celestial pole, that fixed point around which all of heaven appears to rotate. And here the shamanic thread returns, shining and clear, because in the shamanic traditions of the ancient world, traditions that stretch from Siberia across Central Asia into the Middle East, and all the way to the indigenous cultures of North and South America. The northern celestial pole was understood as the most sacred point in the cosmos. It was the axis of the universe, the still center around which everything moved, the point from which creation had unfolded, and toward which the soul, in its journey between worlds, could orient itself. The shamans of these traditions described a hole in the sky, a spiritual aperture at the pole star, through which the ascending soul could pass from this world into the next. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe were orienting their most sacred structures toward this point in the sky, then what they were doing was not merely astronomy in the modern sense. They were building their temples in alignment with the soul's passageway. They were constructing a physical gateway that mirrored the cosmic one. They were saying in stone, this is the axis, this is the center, this is the place where the human world and the spirit world touch. Breathe in slowly and out. Your thoughts are loosening, floating, drifting like smoke from a fire that has burned down to warm coals. You don't need to hold any of this. Let it drift through you, leaving its warmth behind. There is one particular piece of astronomical research connected to Göbekli Tepe that has generated more discussion than almost any other. It concerns, once again, the vulture stone. In 2017, researchers from the University of Edinburgh published a study in which they proposed something remarkable. They suggested that the carvings on Pillar 43 are not simply symbolic or narrative images. They are a date stamp. They are a record of a specific event in the sky, set down in the language of constellations, at the precise moment that the event occurred, and the event they identified was the impact of a comet. Their argument runs as follows. The large scorpion carved on the pillar corresponds to the constellation Scorpius. The duck-like bird near it corresponds to Libra. The wolf-like figure corresponds to Lupus. The disk or sphere resting above the vulture's wing represents the sun. And when these constellation positions are fed into astronomical computer programs that can reconstruct the ancient sky. When you ask the program to tell you when these particular constellations were in the positions shown on the pillar, with the sun in that particular place among them, the answer comes back to a specific period of time, around 10,950 years before the birth of Christ, which is precisely the beginning of the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas. Let that name settle in your mind like a smooth stone settling to the bottom of a clear, cold pool. It refers to a sudden and dramatic climate event that began approximately 12,900 years ago, a cooling period so severe and so rapid that it is sometimes described as a mini ice age. Within just a few decades, temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped sharply. Glaciers began to re-advance. The vast grasslands of the Fertile Crescent, those sweeping plains of wild wheat and barley that had fed the hunter-gatherers of this region for millennia, began to contract and thin. Rivers changed their courses. Animal herds moved or diminished. The paradise that had existed in this part of the world suddenly became more difficult, more unpredictable, more demanding. For more than 1,000 years, the Younger Dryas persisted, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Temperatures rose again. The earth warmed. And in the millennia that followed, in the very period when Göbekli Tepe was being built, the Fertile Crescent bloomed again into that generosity of wild grain and grazing animals. What caused the Younger Dryas? The debate continues. One prominent hypothesis suggests that a comet or cluster of comet fragments struck the Earth's atmosphere approximately 12,900 years ago, triggering catastrophic fires, a massive cloud of dust and debris, and the rapid cooling that followed. Ice cores from Greenland show layers of specific chemical markers, platinum, iridium, microspherules, that some researchers believe indicate an extraterrestrial impact event. But if the Edinburgh researchers are correct, if the carvings on Pillar 43 are indeed a record of this event, then the people of Göbekli Tepe were not simply building a spiritual space. They were also building a memorial, a monument to a catastrophe so enormous and so transformative that it was carved in stone to be remembered. The headless man at the base of the pillar in this reading represents the death and devastation that the comet brought. The vulture represents the mass death that followed, and the entire carving is a date stamp in the language of stars, saying, "This is when it happened. Remember." Other researchers, including Klaus Schmidt himself before his death, have pushed back on this interpretation. They point out that the pillar's carvings carry too many possible meanings to be reduced to a single astronomical reading. They note that the ball above the vulture's wing, which some identify as the sun, was identified by Schmidt as a disembodied human head, the soul in transit. They argue that the carvings speak primarily of the soul's journey and the shamanic cosmology of the builders. And both of these things may be true. The carvings may be polysemous, capable of carrying multiple meanings at once, just as the greatest works of human art always are. They may be simultaneously a soul journey narrative, a shamanic map of the cosmos, an astronomical calendar, and a memorial to a catastrophe. Perhaps in the builder's understanding, a comet's strike from the sky was not separate from the journey of the soul. Perhaps the sky was where everything ultimately converged, the personal and the cosmic, the spiritual and the physical. So, let yourself drift a little deeper now. Your breathing is beautifully slow, in and out. The night is soft around you. There is no urgency here, no pressure. Simply float, simply listen, simply rest, and let us follow the question of the comet and the younger Dryas a little further, because it leads us to what may be the most sweeping and surprising connection that Göbekli Tepe offers to the larger story of human civilization. If the younger Dryas climate event made the Fertile Crescent more difficult, if the wild grain harvest became less reliable, the animal herds thinner, the rivers less predictable, then the people who depended on this landscape for their food would have been under new pressures. And under new pressures, people find new solutions. The solution that emerged in this part of the world over the centuries and millennia that followed the end of the younger Dryas was farming. Not all at once, not in a single moment of invention, but slowly, gradually, experimentally. The people of the Fertile Crescent began to manage the wild plants around them more deliberately. They began to save the seeds of the grains with the most favorable characteristics. They began to plant those seeds in places where they could tend them. They began, in other words, to participate in the reproduction of their food rather than simply receiving what the wild world offered. And over generations of this patient, experimental participation, the wild plants changed in response to human attention. And the domestic varieties of wheat and barley and lentils and chickpeas came into being. This process, the Neolithic Revolution, the invention of agriculture, is considered one of the most consequential transitions in all of human history. And the very center of it, the genetic ground zero, as it were, is right here, right in the shadow of Göbekli Tepe. Geneticists studying the DNA of modern wheat and its wild relatives have traced the origin of domesticated einkorn wheat, the first cultivated grain, the ancestor of all the bread humanity would ever bake. To the slopes of a volcanic mountain called Karakada, which rises from the plain just 60 miles northeast of Göbekli Tepe. The wild einkorn that grew on those slopes is the mother of every wheat field on earth today. And the dates of its earliest domestication overlap almost precisely with the height of activity at Göbekli Tepe. Klaus Schmidt spent years thinking about this relationship, and his conclusion was breathtaking in its simplicity and its depth. He proposed that the people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe to build and maintain their sacred enclosures, the people who came from 100 miles around to feast and carry out their ceremonies on this holy hill, needed to be fed. And feeding large numbers of people consistently over years and decades was a problem that the wild landscape alone could not always solve. And so, to feed the sacred work, humans began to farm. The temple created the demand. The demand created the technology. The sacred came first, and civilization followed from the sacred, exactly as Schmidt had said. First, the temple, then the grain, then the city, then the world. Your eyelids are heavy now, deliciously, peacefully heavy. Your body is so still, so warm, so perfectly at rest. Feel yourself sinking just a little further, deeper into the warmth, deeper into the quiet. You are doing beautifully. Just breathe in slowly and out slowly, and let the story continue. We have spoken of the sky and of the grain. Now let us speak of something older still, of the deep spiritual waters from which Göbekli Tepe rises. The mythological ocean in which this hill is an island, connected by invisible currents to traditions that most of us have encountered in some form, even if we did not know their source. The city of Şanlıurfa, which sits just 12 miles southwest of Göbekli Tepe, has been known across centuries and faiths as one of the most sacred cities in the world. Its other name, Edessa, echoes through early Christian history. And deeper still, the Arabic and Turkish name of the city, Urfa, preserves an even older identity. This was called, across many traditions, the city of the prophets, and not without reason, because near the city, in a region thick with sacred waters, a spring bubbles up in the center of an ancient pool called Balıklı Göl, the pool of sacred fish. According to tradition, this is the place where the patriarch Abraham was born. The place where, as the story is told, the king Nimrod had Abraham thrown into a great fire for refusing to worship idols, and where Abraham was miraculously saved, the fire turning to water and the burning coals to fish, which still swim in the pool today, considered sacred and never to be caught or eaten. The region around Göbekli Tepe has always been understood as the beginning of things, the place before all other places, the original sacred ground. And some scholars have noted the proximity of Göbekli Tepe to the traditional sites associated with the Garden of Eden. The book of Genesis places Eden at the source of 4 rivers, 2 of which are named as the Tigris and the Euphrates. Those rivers rise in the mountains of southeastern Turkey. Their headwaters are not far from Göbekli Tepe. The landscape around the site as it would have appeared 11,000 years ago. With its abundant wild grains, its herds of grazing animals, its generous and beautiful wildness, matches with uncomfortable precision the description of a paradise garden that existed before the advent of agricultural labor. And there is a detail in the story of Eden that is particularly haunting in light of what we know about Göbekli Tepe, the serpent, the sacred serpent that winds through the Garden of Eden story, is one of the most ancient of all symbolic figures, appearing in mythologies across the globe. The Naga serpent deities of Hindu and Buddhist tradition, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica, the Egyptian Uraeus cobra of royal power, the rod of Moses that transforms into a serpent and back. And at Göbekli Tepe, among all the animals carved on the pillars, the serpent appears more than any other. Dozens of snakes wind up the shafts of the pillars, coil at the bases, thread between the legs of foxes and the wings of vultures. In some enclosures, the snakes appear to be the dominant image. In shamanic traditions across the world, the serpent is associated with wisdom, with the underworld, with the connection between the earthly and the spiritual realms. The snake sheds its skin and is reborn, making it a natural symbol of renewal and transformation. Its sinuous movement along the ground connects it to both the roots of trees and the flow of water, to the deep, slow processes of the earth itself. There is a sense, sitting with all of this, that the mythology that eventually crystallized in the Genesis story, the garden, the serpent, the awakening of knowledge, the departure from a state of grace into a state of labor and settlement, may carry within it the compressed memory of exactly what happened in this part of the world, in this period of time. The paradise of the Fertile Crescent before farming, the serpent wisdom of the shamanic tradition, the moment when humans crossed the threshold from the gathering life into the planting life, from following the wild world to managing it, from the garden to the field. The story of Eden in this reading is not simply a story about sin. It is a story about transformation, about the moment when humanity stepped forward into a new relationship with the earth. And Göbekli Tepe may stand at the very hinge of that transformation. The last great monument of the world before farming, the first great monument of the world that farming would eventually make possible. Let that settle into you now, softly and without urgency. There is no need to resolve these ideas into certainty. Certainty is not the language of this place. Mystery is. Wonder is. The willingness to sit with the unanswered question and find it beautiful rather than frustrating. That is what Göbekli Tepe asks of us, and that willingness, held gently, is itself a kind of peace. Breathe in and out. You are very relaxed. The night is deep. Your body is beautifully still. Somewhere far below your awareness, your heart is beating its own ancient rhythm, steady and unhurried as a stone drum. Let us now speak of something that emerged from the earth at Göbekli Tepe in 2017 that sent a quiet shiver through the archaeological community. A discovery that added another layer to the site's spiritual identity. A discovery that connected this ancient place to a practice that has been found at sacred sites across the Neolithic world, from Turkey to Jericho to Çatalhöyük, the skull cult. In the summer of 2017, archaeologists working at Göbekli Tepe found fragments of 3 human skulls. These were not ordinary burials. These skulls had been modified after death, with great care and deliberateness. Deep grooves had been cut into the outer surface of the skulls, following precise paths along the bone. A hole had been drilled through the crown of one of them, suggesting that it had once been hung, or displayed, or worn. Red ochre, the iron-rich mineral pigment that has been used in human ritual for at least 250,000 years, had been applied to the surfaces. These were not the remains of ordinary dead. These were objects of veneration, sacred bones, the kept and honored skulls of individuals who had, in death, been elevated to a special status, perhaps as ancestors, perhaps as shamans, perhaps as founding figures of the community. This practice of skull veneration is not unique to Göbekli Tepe. At the ancient settlement of Jericho in modern Jordan, dated to approximately the same period, plastered human skulls were found. Real skulls, whose faces had been modeled over with plaster, the eye sockets filled with shells, creating eerily lifelike portraits of the dead. These plastered skulls were found beneath the floors of houses, suggesting that the ancestors literally lived with the living. Their preserved heads kept in the domestic space as a bridge between the world of the quick and the world of the dead. At Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, a later but related site, similar practices emerged, with skulls sometimes passed from household to household or carried across significant distances. At Göbekli Tepe, the skull fragments, with their careful incisions and their holes for hanging, suggest that this was not merely a personal or family practice. The sacred site itself was a place where the honored dead were present, where the ancestors watched, alongside the great stone ancestor figures of the pillars, where the boundary between the living community and the community of those who had passed was permeable, maintained through ritual, held open by intentional sacred practice. The dead were part of the gathering. They always had been. Feel the quiet depth of that. The understanding that in the oldest sacred spaces our species built, the dead were not exiled from the living. They were invited. They were held. They were part of the ongoing conversation of the community. Your eyelids are so heavy now. Your breathing so slow and so regular, in and out, in and out. The story flows around you like warm water, and you are floating in it, very gently, very peacefully. Let us turn now toward the broader world of Göbekli Tepe, toward the related sites that are beginning, even as you rest here, to emerge from the earth of southeastern Turkey, and reveal the full scope of what this network of sacred places meant. Karahan Tepe is perhaps the most exciting of these sister sites. Located about 30 kilometers to the southeast of Göbekli Tepe, it was not excavated in earnest until 2019, when a Turkish team began work there. What they found has been described by those who have seen it as even more astonishing than its more famous neighbor. At Karahan Tepe, one structure in particular has captured the imagination of the world. It is a chamber carved partly into the bedrock itself, not built up from the ground, but carved down into the living stone of the hill, creating a space that feels fundamentally intimate, fundamentally internal, like the inside of a body or a womb. From the walls of this chamber, a series of carved phalluses emerge. 11 of them, ranging in size from modest to enormous, each one distinct, each one carved with care. And from among these carved forms, a human head emerges directly from the rock of one wall, as if surfacing from the stone itself, this human head. Let us pause here and let it become real in your imagination. It is the oldest three-dimensional portrait of a human face ever found. Carved in limestone approximately 12,000 years ago, it emerges from the bedrock wall with an expression of absolute calm. The eyes are slightly hooded, the features composed. The impression is of a person who is entirely present and entirely at peace. There is something about seeing a human face look back at you across 12,000 years of time that produces a particular sensation. Not quite like anything else. Recognition. The realization that the face is doing what all faces do, looking at you. Across all that time, it is looking at you, and you are looking back. Who was this person? Was it a specific individual, a founder, or a shaman, or a figure of particular sacred importance? Was it a deity? Was it an ancestor? Was it an idealized human form representing something about the nature of humanity itself? We don't know. We may never know. But the face is there, and it has been looking since long before any city was built, long before any river was dammed or any field was plowed, long before any of the structures that we think of as constituting civilization had come into being. And it is beautiful. At the site of Seyburt, another related location, a carved wall panel was discovered in 2021. It shows a human figure, male, holding what appears to be a rattle or cymbal, facing a great leopard in a posture that suggests not fear but relationship, perhaps confrontation, perhaps dialogue, perhaps ceremony. And to the other side of this human figure, a great bull, wild and powerful, its horns massive, its body dense with captured energy. Between the human and the animals, no weapon, no spear, no hunt, just presence, just the encounter of two kinds of being at the edge of each other's world. This image from sabers tells us something about the way these people understood their place in the living community of the earth. They were not simply hunters who used animals as food. They were participants in a world populated by other kinds of consciousness, other kinds of power, other kinds of being. The animals were sacred. The animals were teachers. The animals were, in the language of animism that would have infused every aspect of life in this period, alive in ways that went far beyond the biological. They were inhabited by spirit. They were, in the deepest sense, persons. This understanding, the fundamental aliveness of the world, the presence of spirit in stone and water and animal and wind, is what we now call animism, and it is not, as it was once condescendingly characterized, a primitive and confused attempt to explain the natural world. It is, rather, a sophisticated and ancient mode of relationship with the living earth. A way of being in the world that recognizes what modern ecology is only beginning to articulate in its own language. That the world is not a collection of objects, but a community of subjects. That the web of life is not a mechanism, but a conversation. That to inhabit this earth is to be in relation with everything that inhabits it with you. The people of Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites understood this with a completeness and a depth that we are only beginning to relearn. And they encoded that understanding in stone, in the fox running up the pillar, in the vulture with its wings wide, in the snake winding its eternal path between the earth and the sky. Your breath is very slow now. Your body is very still. You are in that beautiful place where the boundary between your thoughts and your dreams has grown soft and permeable, where the things you hear and the things you feel are beginning to blend into one another, like colors running together in warm water. This is exactly where you need to be. Stay here. Let the story carry you just a little further. There is something that happens to people who visit Göbekli Tepe, something that researchers and journalists and ordinary travelers have described again and again in different words from different perspectives. Something that happens when you stand in the enclosures and look up at the pillars and let the reality of where you are settle into you. What happens is a kind of stillness, not the stillness of boredom or emptiness, but the stillness of something being recognized, something in the body, below the level of articulated thought, responds to this place, responds to the scale of the pillars, to the enclosing circle, to the carved figures of animals watching from the stone, responds to the knowledge that this is very old, that people were here doing something that mattered to them in a time so far before our own that all the accumulated history we carry in our heads is a mere moment compared to the age of these stones. The stillness that happens is the stillness of perspective, of suddenly, viscerally understanding your own position in the long story of the species. Not as a diminishment, not as the feeling of being small and unimportant, but as a deepening, a sense that you are part of something vast and ongoing and extraordinary. and that your own brief life, with all its particular beauty and difficulty, is a stitch in a cloth that has been weaving for hundreds of thousands of years. This is what the sacred does. This is what it has always done. It situates us. It gives us our proper place in the larger pattern. It reminds us that we are neither the beginning nor the end of the story, but a beloved part of the middle. That we come from somewhere and we are going somewhere, and in between there is this moment, this breath, this life, which is real and precious and full precisely because it is embedded in a context so much larger than itself. Göbekli Tepe gives us this. From the distance of 11,000 years, the stones of this ancient hill reach across time and offer us perspective, offer us depth, offer us the quiet comfort of belonging to something that has been going on for a very long time and will continue after we are gone. Patient and enduring as limestone in the earth. And now let us draw together all the threads of what we have been considering and let them form something complete. Not an explanation, because Göbekli Tepe resists complete explanation with a serene and total confidence, but a feeling, a sense of what this place represents in the long, long story of our species. Human beings have been on this earth, in our current form, for approximately 300,000 years. For most of that time, for the vast majority of that incomprehensible span of centuries, we lived as Göbekli Tepe's builders lived. Moving with the seasons, following the animals, knowing the land, the way you know the face of someone you have loved for a lifetime. We were part of the living community of the earth in a way that is difficult to imagine from within the structures of the world we have built since. And then, at a particular moment in a particular place, something shifted, not all at once, not cleanly or simply, but something began at Göbekli Tepe, or around it, or because of it, or alongside it, something that would eventually become cities, and writing, and mathematics, and medicine, and music, and all the extraordinary, complicated, beautiful, flawed structures of the world we inhabit now. The question that Göbekli Tepe poses, gently, without urgency, in the language of carved stone, is this: what was it that moved those first humans to gather on the hill? What called them up from the valley and the plain to stand in a circle together and lift those enormous stones into place? What was the need that the temple answered? And the answer increasingly seems to be the same need that moves people now. The need to feel that the world is not random and meaningless. The need to stand together in the presence of something vast and beautiful. The need to mark the sacred. The need to say together, we are here, and we recognize the mystery, and we are not alone in it. This need is not something that came before civilization. It is not something that civilization eventually produced. It is the seed from which civilization grew. It is the most fundamental human thing there is, more fundamental than agriculture, more fundamental than cities, more fundamental than writing or pottery or the wheel. The hunger for meaning, the hunger for the sacred, the hunger to build something that says, We were here, and we cared, and we tried to understand. That hunger, 11,000 years ago, built Göbekli Tepe. And that same hunger, in countless forms and expressions, has been building things ever since. Let your body grow heavier now, and heavier still. Feel the sweet weight of deep relaxation spreading from the crown of your head downward, like warm honey moving slowly through your entire body. Your forehead is smooth and soft. Your eyes are resting, their work done for the day. Your jaw is completely relaxed. Your throat, your shoulders, your chest, all releasing, releasing, releasing. Your arms are heavy as warm stone. Your belly rises and falls with each slow, beautiful breath. Your legs are still. Your feet are still. You are completely, perfectly at rest. And now let us draw the story a little deeper still, into the hands that made these things, into the skill and the devotion of the carvers, into the animals that watch from the stone, and what they meant to the people who put them there. And finally, into what all of this means for us. Sitting here, breathing quietly, in the long warmth of a night that connects us to every night that has ever been. There is one final region of this ancient story we have not yet entered, a quieter region, one that does not deal in facts or carvings or excavation trenches, but in the ineffable quality of what it means to have been here at all. To have been among those species that looked up and wondered, that reached for the sacred, that built something enormous in order to house an invisible feeling that nonetheless felt like the most real thing in the world. Let us speak of what Göbekli Tepe says about us, about human beings as a species, in the fullness of what we are. For a very long time, we told ourselves a particular story about our own nature. We said, before civilization, humans were brutish, simple, driven only by survival, too preoccupied with finding food to have leisure for thought, art, or spiritual life. We said that complexity came later, that the capacity for abstract reasoning, for planning across time, for creating things whose purpose was not immediately practical, that these were products of civilization, not preconditions for it. We told ourselves, in other words, that we became human through the accumulation of external structures, that our inner richness was an achievement of history rather than a birthright of our nature. Göbekli Tepe dismantles this story gently but completely, because what we find here, at the very threshold of recorded human symbolic activity, is not simplicity, not brutishness. What we find is complexity. We find geometry and symbolism and cosmology and artistic vision. We find the capacity for organized labor on an enormous scale, driven not by hunger but by something that can only be called devotion. We find beauty, made for its own sake and for the sake of what it honored. We find the sacred, already ancient, already sophisticated, already multi-layered, already woven through with astronomical knowledge and shamanic understanding, and a philosophy of the relationship between the human and the natural world that is, in many ways, more ecologically coherent than anything our modern civilization has yet produced. We were never brutish. We were never simple. We were always this, always the creature that looked at the world and found it worthy of the deepest possible attention. Always the creature that gathered together and built things out of love and wonder. Out of the need to say, this matters, and we know that it matters, and we will mark it in the most permanent way we know. What Göbekli Tepe offers us, in this sense, is not just a window into the past. It is a correction to our self-understanding. It tells us something about what we fundamentally are that we may have forgotten in the noise and speed of the world we have made. It reminds us that the deepest drives of our nature are not acquisitive or competitive or fearful, though we are capable of all of those things. The deepest drives of our nature are curious and creative and communal and sacred. We are, in the marrow of our oldest bones, a species that builds temples. Not necessarily temples of stone, temples of meaning, temples of shared understanding, temples of the sacred gesture. The thing done not because it is useful, but because it is true. The meal prepared with love, the song sung in a circle, the moment of quiet before the day begins when you sit with your coffee and watch the light change. And feel, without quite being able to say why, that the world is astonishing and that you are grateful to be in it. These are the small temples. These are the living continuation of what the builders at Göbekli Tepe were doing when they raised their great stone figures into the sky. They were saying, we are aware, we are grateful, we are in relationship with something larger than ourselves, and we are building this to prove it, and to remember it, and to pass it on. You are part of that passing on. Every one of us is. The thread has never broken. It runs from those first gathered hands in the limestone highlands of ancient Anatolia, all the way to this moment, this breath, this quiet. The thread is unbroken. The temple is still being built, stone by stone, moment by moment, in every heart that has ever opened to wonder. Mat. And now, as the last of the words find their way to you and begin to dissolve into the warm, wordless air of deep rest, let us bring this journey to its natural close. Not with an ending, because this story has no ending. The excavations continue. Right now, even as you rest in the warmth of this night, teams of archaeologists at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe and the other Taş Tepeler sites are in their planning stages, reviewing what has been found, imagining what comes next. The brushes and trowels are resting. The notebooks are full of careful drawings and measurements. And beneath the earth of the hill, patient, as it has always been patient, the unexcavated 90% of the site is waiting with a stillness that we might describe as serene, if we were to give to stone the qualities that it so successfully evokes. Each new season of excavation brings revelations. This is not the hyperbole of enthusiastic journalism. It is the steady, documented reality of what happens when you spend time with Göbekli Tepe. In 2011, fragments of carved stone vessels were found that showed artistic imagery similar to the pillar carvings, but in miniature, suggesting that the symbolic language of this sacred place was carried outward in smaller, portable forms, perhaps as objects of personal devotion, perhaps as trade goods, perhaps as the physical tokens of a shared spiritual identity that connected communities across a wide region. In 2017, the skull fragments with their deliberate markings. In 2021, at Cybers, the carved wall panel of extraordinary narrative force. In 2022, at Karahan Tepe, the chamber carved into the living bedrock with its extraordinary human portrait emerging from the stone. And each of these discoveries does what the best discoveries always do. It does not close a question, it opens it. It does not simplify the story, it deepens it. The more that emerges from the earth around Göbekli Tepe, the more we understand that we are looking at something even more complex, even more interconnected, even more intentional than we had imagined. We are looking at a landscape that was sacred across an enormous region and across an enormous span of time. A landscape that was understood by the people who lived within it as the living body of meaning itself. The UNESCO citation speaks of Göbekli Tepe as testimony to the creative human genius of these early societies. And perhaps the most important word in that sentence is the first one: testimony. The site is a testimony. It testifies. It speaks in the only language available to people who had no writing. The language of shaped stone and carved image and deliberate geometry. It speaks of something that was felt and believed and honored and passed on. And we, standing at the other end of 11,000 years, are the recipients of that testimony. We are the ones it was, in some deep and completely unintended way, waiting for. The earth kept the secret. The stone held the carving. The hill preserved the circles. And now we are here, listening, and the testimony is received. Ah, you are a human being. You are descended from a long line of extraordinary creatures who looked at the world with wide, wondering eyes and found it beautiful and mysterious and worthy of their deepest attention, who found each other and built things together out of the need to share in something larger than any individual life could hold, who looked up at the stars and understood that they were looking at something magnificent, even when they had no name for what they were seeing, who looked at each other and felt the particular quality of connection that is the deepest human thing there is. You are the continuation of all of that. You carry it in your body. You carry it in the particular way that awe moves through your chest when you see something vast or beautiful. You carry it in the particular quality of comfort that comes from being part of a group, part of a gathering, part of a shared intention. You carry it in your need for meaning, for beauty, for the sacred. Needs that were already ancient before the first stone was raised at Göbekli Tepe. Needs that will be present in the last human heart that ever beats on this turning earth. These needs are not weaknesses. They are not primitive remnants of a superseded phase of human development. They are the deepest and most essential things about us. They are what we are. And tonight, in this moment of rest, they ask nothing of you. They are simply present, as they are always present, quietly attending, quietly waiting with the patience of limestone for the next moment when they will be needed. When you will stand somewhere and feel the particular quality of recognition that says, "This matters, this is sacred, this is part of the great story that I am part of, and I am grateful, and I am here." Let your breathing deepen one final time, all the way in, filling your lungs completely, and all the way out, releasing, releasing everything, every thought, every plan, every worry, every calculation. Let it all go out with the breath, like smoke from an ancient fire dissolving into the clear, cold air above a hill in southeastern Turkey. The hill is quiet. The stars are circling slowly, as they have always circled, as they will always circle. The carved figures in the stone are in their places. The fox is running. The vulture is spreading its wings. The serpent is winding its ancient path. The two great central pillars stand facing each other in their wordless dialogue that has been going on for 11,000 years and shows no signs of ending. And you are resting. Resting in the long warmth of the story. Resting in the deep assurance that you are part of something ancient and ongoing and beautiful. Resting in the quiet that comes after a long journey through time, when you have arrived somewhere. Not at a destination exactly, but at a depth within yourself, where everything is slow and still and true. Sleep is here now. It has been patient, as stone is patient, waiting for you to be ready. And you are ready. Your body is perfectly still. Your mind has grown soft and open as morning earth after rain. The last edges of waking thought are dissolving, gently and completely, into the warm dark of sleep. Let it happen. Let sleep come like the earth coming up over the ancient stones. Let it cover you completely, smoothly, warmly, preserving everything that is precious in you for the morning. When you will rise and go on with the living of your life, the extraordinary, brief, beautiful, specific, singular life that is yours and no one else's. And that continues the ancient story in ways that only you can tell. The hill is watching over you, the patient, curious, 10% revealed, 90% still mysterious hill, half a world away, in the golden limestone country above the Harran Plain. And it wishes you, across all the distance of all those years, the deepest and most restoring sleep. Good night. Good night.